Welcome to Scriptura's layer-by-layer overview of Psalm 4. When I was in distress, you granted me relief. Know that the Lord has set apart one who is loyal to him. You have put joy in my heart since the time their grain and their new wine multiplied. Psalm 4 is a celebration of God sending rain to end a drought and providing abundant crops for Israel. When the Lord provides for his people, it shows his character and that he will equally bless every nation who worships him. Psalm 4 moves from celebrating God's blessing on Israel to inviting all humanity to experience the same blessing that Israel has experienced. A helpful way to remember Psalm 4 is with the words used to express God's blessing, the light of your face. When a people experienced God's blessing, they spoke of it as light shining down from God's face to show he approved of them. Israel knew what living in the light from God's face was like, and this psalm invites the rest of the nations to come to experience it too. Psalm 4 has 3 sections, which are divided by changes in whom the psalmist addresses. First, he speaks to the Lord, then to all of humanity, even foreign nations who worshipped idols, and then once again to the Lord. In the first section, relief, the psalmist expresses his joy as he publicly proclaims that God provided relief to his people after a time when they were distressed. From what we read later in the psalm, and from what we know of the climate of the ancient world, it's likely there was not enough rain for the crops to grow. God relieved them by sending rain, which led to an abundant harvest. The main point of this section is to identify the Lord as the one who responds to his people when they are in distress. The Lord is a God who brings relief to his people. The second section builds on this idea that the Lord is a God who brings relief to his people. In it, the psalmist gives an invitation to the nations, inviting them to also know the Lord as their God, if they stop seeking false gods, trying to please them, and instead come to worship the Lord the way he requires, by trusting only in him. This makes sense when we remember what God promised Abraham, that God would bless Israel, providing relief to his people in hard times, as part of his plan to extend his blessing to all nations. When the Lord blessed Israel, he expected them to invite other nations to experience the same blessing. The psalmist's words refer to Moses' prophecy in Deuteronomy 33 to show that the Lord blessing his people recently fulfills that prophecy. The Lord gives relief to his people, first to bless Israel, which then invites the nations to worship the Lord as well. The invitation to the nations was often ignored. In this section, the psalmist is impatient because the nations continue to seek false gods, in spite of all the reasons to worship the Lord instead. But the psalmist also expects that one day the nations will pay attention, and indeed they will seek the Lord. The final section fills in the details of the whole context of the psalm. The psalmist clearly tells about the blessing the Lord gave Israel when he responded to how they suffered in this difficult time, probably of drought. The psalm brings the attention back to when Israel celebrated the blessing, both because it immediately affected God's people and because it raised a banner, or, in other words, was intended as a signal to invite the other nations to come join in worshiping the Lord and to come experience his blessing. The psalm closes by revealing how the blessing also personally affects the psalmist. When God is good to Israel, the psalmist himself feels complete peace and confidence. The blessing that Moses prophesied about extended in 2 directions, outward to the nations and also inward so that even God's anointed king, David, could sleep peacefully. Psalm 4 makes sense when we remember that, from the beginning, Israel was intended to be an example to the nations, representing what it looks like to live as a nation blessed by the Lord. When the Lord blessed Israel, he lifted up a banner, giving everyone a signal they could easily understand, in order to reveal what his character was like and what his relationship with his people was like. The purpose of Psalm 4 is to celebrate a specific time when the Lord blessed his people. As they celebrated, they were aware that one of the reasons the Lord intended to bless them was to invite the other nations to come and experience the Lord's blessing as well. As they celebrated, they were also reminded that Israel experienced peace and security only because of the Lord, the God who responds when his people call out for help when they are in distress. No other God from any other nation could provide the same peace and security for them. By trusting in the Lord, Israel and her king not only enjoyed good harvests after a long drought, but they also enjoyed the peace of complete well-being. And the other nations could have that same peace and well-being that Israel and her king did. There's a little background knowledge, first on rain, then the nations, and then on genre and purpose, that will be helpful for understanding Psalm 4. People in the ancient world often worried about whether there would be enough rain. Without enough rain, the harvest would fail, and the people would not have enough food to survive. Famines were common. Because drought was such a significant problem, people thought of having enough rain as something that they needed in order for life to be good. And they expected the nation and the king to focus on making sure there would be enough rain. The people expected the king to represent the nation in their relationship with God and make sure God sent rain so their land would produce good harvests. If there wasn't enough rain and the people were hungry, the people would blame the king for failing to get God to help them. They might want a different king if they suffered too much from droughts. So the king was motivated to beg God for rain. The backdrop for Psalm 4 seems to be a difficult time for farmers, probably a drought. David called out to God to bring rain. God answered, we assume by sending rain, which led to a good harvest, the grain and new wine of verse 8. But the psalm does not focus on the drought, the rain, or the harvest. Those are simply the events that show the Lord responds to his people. They are celebrating that the Lord did respond and did provide relief for them. It was the Lord who relieved the people in their distress, and the people are celebrating the rain as evidence that the Lord continues to bless his people. There's a direct connection between God blessing Israel and the nations worshiping God. When God chose Abraham, he promised that Abraham's descendants, the people who became the nation of Israel, would be a blessing to all nations. We see in Moses' prophecy in Deuteronomy 33 that when God blessed Israel with abundant harvests, that would invite foreigners to come to Mount Zion to join in with Israel and worship the Lord by offering right sacrifices. So God blessed Israel for two reasons. He wanted to give Israel good things, but he also wanted to invite foreign nations to come worship him and experience the same blessings. We need to have this basic understanding of blessing in order to understand many different psalms. For example, Psalm 67, which has many similarities with Psalm 4. This brings us to questions many people have asked about what type of psalm this is and what it was for. Is it a prayer? A blessing? A celebration? When our team studied Psalm 4 several years ago, we concluded it was a prayer the king prayed as the nation's representative to God, the person responsible for getting God's blessing for his people. However, as we studied the differences in the ancient manuscripts more deeply, we became convinced that the psalm is actually a celebration of when God did answer David's prayer. See our exegetical issues video for full details on the two different ways of interpreting Psalm 4. One way, which we followed at first, depends only on the Masoretic text, the best preserved Hebrew text. The other way depends also on the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew that sometimes preserves better and earlier Hebrew than the Masoretic text. Our recent study has convinced us that the Septuagint, with its translation of the more ancient scrolls of Psalms, gives us the best clues about the psalmist's purpose when he wrote this psalm. Once we understand the purpose, we have the context we need to interpret the details. In all languages, different contexts make a tremendous difference in what we understand the text to mean. In Hebrew poetry, this is especially true of how we interpret verbs. It is common for different forms of a word to be written the same way, but pronounced differently, depending on what the word means. We don't need to think about this when speaking, because then we only think about saying it aloud. But when reading, we have to make a decision about which form of the word is intended. For example, in English, the letters R-E-A-D spell out both the present tense of read, as in, every day I read, and the past tense of read, as in, yesterday I read. The two forms look identical when written, and it is the job of the reader to determine what to say based on the context. This is also the case with Hebrew manuscripts. Many decisions about how to read a word out loud depend on context. If we read the psalm as the psalmist responding to a difficult time that has ended, with the nation now celebrating that God has already relieved their suffering and blessed them, then we read multiple verbs a certain way. But we would read them differently if we thought David was praying for God to act in the future. In verse 2, there are 3 verbs in the Masoretic text that are often read out loud as imperatives, a verb form common in prayers that are asking God to do something now. Respond to me when I cry out, my righteous God. Be merciful to me and hear my prayer. But the Septuagint used past tense verbs in Greek to translate the earlier Hebrew. This suggests that before the Masoretic text was written down, the ancient readers were reading about past events. The God who makes things right for me answered me. He was merciful to me and heard my prayer. Both are talking about a time when David called out to God, but one treats it as a current event and the other as a past event. We now understand the past event to make more sense of the psalm. We'll now walk through the text in more detail, section by section.
For the Director, with stringed instruments, a psalm by David. When I called out, the God who makes things right for me answered me. In the distress you granted me relief. He was merciful to me and heard my prayer.
We learn from the superscription that this is one of David's psalms. This superscription is important, not just because David was the author, but also because David was the anointed king of Israel. David had the special job of representing the people in front of God and representing God in front of the people. When a superscription mentions David, we remember that God chose him to be the king and gave him this special job of connecting heaven and earth, connecting God and the people of Israel. God promised to always take care of the king, and the king promised to always be faithful or loyal to God. The psalm says it was written for the director and with stringed instruments. The superscription for the director reminds us these psalms were intended to be used over and over again to worship God in the temple. Even though some psalms may have been originally written because of a single moment in history, people use them again in many similar, but not identical, situations. The stringed instruments may have signaled a certain emotional tone, perhaps like in Psalm 67, which has a nearly identical superscription and similar themes. As the psalm opens, David immediately refers to a time when he was in distress in the past. When I called out, the God who makes things right for me answered me. We do not know exactly what made David distressed, but it is common for psalms, especially psalms for the director, to talk about specific events in very general ways so that people can use them in many situations. When we look closely at Psalm 4, it seems that the distress that prompted the prayer was most likely a drought, because he mentions being joyful after the harvest, the time when the grain and new wine abound. The distress David felt was the reason he called out to God, and it was an opportunity for God to show how faithful and good he was by answering him. This is the pattern set out in Psalm 2. God tells his anointed king that his job is to ask him for help and blessings, and he will respond by giving the king his inheritance. When he was distressed, David asked God to give him relief, and God answered. David calls him the God who makes things right for me. He describes God as the one who enables him to succeed, even when times are hard. God enables him to move from experiencing distress to experiencing prosperity and rightness. Elsewhere, this same word is often translated as salvation, but here it does not refer to God rescuing David from spiritual danger or from enemies. Rather, it refers to the sense of well-being and safety that comes from having a close relationship with God that is right. God saves David by taking him from distress and making him prosperous again. God makes things right the way God wants them to be. The Hebrew imagery is not immediately clear in many translations, but the word for distress refers to narrowness, a quality that describes small or tight places. Granting relief refers to making something bigger, the action of freeing whatever is confined by the narrow and tight place. Granting relief provides room to move around freely. God relieving David in his difficult time was like God making a tight place where he felt trapped and threatened into a wide open, peaceful place where he felt safe. This language of tight places and God making the space bigger is often used in the Psalms to express the contrast between how people feel during hard times and the overwhelming relief they feel when God saves them. God is known for saving people in this way, by rescuing them from hard times and making them prosperous again. And this psalm will provide one more example of a time God brought relief. If we interpret these verbs as imperatives, as people usually do when they read the Masoretic text, then verse 2 seems to be David repeating what he prayed to God in the past, mixed with thoughts that he had later on, after God answered his prayer. It would be as if he were saying, "When Israel was in such great distress, I said, 'When I call out, answer me.' Yes, in that distress, you granted relief. You heard when I said, 'Have mercy on me and hear my prayer.'" It is a possible reading, but it is awkward. In contrast, if we read these verbs as describing past events, like the translators of the most ancient Hebrew, then when David says, "God was merciful to me and heard my prayer," he does not mean that God simply became aware of the prayer, but that God responded to what David asked by taking action and giving him what he asked for. This is language that summarizes David's experiences with the Lord. He often found himself in a tight place, but when he asked God for help, God would just as often respond with mercy and give David what he needed. That was what the life of a king in covenant with the Lord, the God of Israel, was always like. The faithful relationship, or loyal relationship, between God and the king implies a faithful or loyal relationship between God and the people, because the king represented the people. We will see details of that relationship in the last section, and a note of it in the middle section. But it's important to recognize that the connection between God and Israel is already implied here, because this is the relationship that God offers even to foreign nations in the next section.
Mortal humans, how long will you be heavy-hearted? Why would you love what is worthless, seek what is false? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart one who is loyal to him. The Lord hears when I call out to him. Tremble and do not sin. Think to yourselves on your beds and be silent. Selah. Sacrifice right sacrifices and trust in the Lord.
Verse 3 begins the second section, the invitation to all people, even to people who belong to nations other than Israel. The Lord desired to extend his blessing to the whole world, but he required something first. They must worship him and only him as their God. People who did not worship the true God, the Lord, were worshiping false gods, which the Hebrew scriptures often call what is worthless and what is false. After reflecting on his own relationship with God, David turns his attention to the rest of humanity, those people who do not have a relationship with the Lord like he does. He calls them heavy-hearted and claims they choose to worship gods other than the Lord on purpose. The expression translated heavy-hearted was a common figure of speech meaning stubborn, and it reminded the people of Israel of the Exodus event and the plagues God sent to punish Egypt. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, was a perfect example of what it meant to be heavy-hearted or hard-hearted, because he refused to acknowledge the Lord as God. David rebukes everyone who continues to be stubborn and refuses to worship the Lord. Instead, they are serving or loving what is worthless and false, that is, idols. People who want the Lord to bless them must do what he requires and worship him the right way. This right worship begins with turning away from all idols and all false worship. How did the people decide which gods to worship? They worshipped the gods who seemed to answer them. When one nation defeated another nation, people would serve the god of the conquering nation. When they needed rain, people would worship the God who would send rain. This becomes David's focus. The God who brings the most wanted blessing, rain, is the Lord. And the people who worship him the right way can rely on him to answer them. David points to recent history for proof. Know that the Lord has set apart, or treated in an excellent way, one who is loyal to him. The Lord hears when I call out to him. When David prayed, the Lord did not respond in a stingy way. He set David apart in the sense of choosing him from everyone else to receive excellent treatment. This is the same verb used in the Exodus story, when God chose the Israelites and set them apart to protect them from the plagues that the rest of Egypt suffered. In this recent time of drought and famine, God chose Israel from every other nation by setting apart their king, David, for excellent treatment. God listened to David and protected the nation from famine. He brought rain that led to abundant harvests. God chose Israel from the other nations, and he chose David, Israel's king, for special treatment because David was one who is loyal to him, meaning one who worships the Lord in the way the Lord requires. To be loyal or faithful is to do everything someone expects based on what a relationship requires. In David's case, the relationship is specifically the covenant with the Lord. So the one loyal to the Lord is the one who keeps the covenant. And for that reason, the one who can expect the covenant blessings. The logic is very simple. David says to the nations, "Look at the wonderful blessings Israel has received because we've kept the covenant. You are invited to also be in covenant with the Lord and to receive the same blessings." For those who like this idea and want to respond to the invitation, David explains the next steps. Tremble and do not sin. This means shake in fear because you are acknowledging God is the all-powerful King of the earth. And stop rebelling against his rule. Think to yourselves on your beds and be silent. Here, David is correcting the common pagan practice of yelling loudly to try to get a god to pay attention to what the people are asking for, like the prophets of Baal did on Mount Carmel. David instructs people how to get the Lord's attention. Instead of making a big public show of how devoted they are in their praying, they're supposed to ask the Lord directly for what they need, on their beds, in private. When they are ready to turn away from their idols and worship only the Lord in their hearts, then they will be ready to publicly show their devotion and worship the Lord in the way he requires. They will be ready to sacrifice right sacrifices according to the Lord's law, and to trust in the Lord, meaning to rely on the Lord to protect and provide for them. To trust in the Lord is not just a state of mind. It's a commitment to depend on the Lord for practical help with real problems, like attacking armies or droughts and famine. Trusting in the Lord means the people do not ask false gods to protect them or provide for them, but they depend on the Lord alone for all the help they need. To trust in the Lord alone means completely turning away from all false gods.
Many are saying, "Who shows us good? Lift up the light of your face as a banner over us, Lord. You have put joy in my heart since the time their grain and their new wine multiplied. In peace I can both lie down and fall asleep, because you alone, Lord, make me dwell securely."
The third section, the blessing that caused David to write the entire psalm, might have been the first section if this were a prose story. In these verses, the psalmist celebrates the Lord blessing his people with an abundant harvest, and with the joy, peace, and security that come with a good harvest. This section is far more meaningful when we recognize how it is connected with Aaron's blessing in Numbers 6, as well as Moses' blessing in Deuteronomy 33. See our resource site for details on Deuteronomy 33. In Numbers 6, we read about the high priestly blessing, which includes the specific words, "May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May he be merciful to you and give you peace." The wording of being merciful was already in verse 2, and in this section we find the rest of the blessing repeated. The Lord's face is shining, as if his face were a source of light that represents the blessing he gives his people. When he approves of them, his face shines on them like the sun. When he disapproves of them, he turns away, and they are in darkness. In the ancient world, being in darkness symbolized being left unprotected and vulnerable with no blessings. Aaron blesses the people with the Lord's attention and approval. The culmination of the blessings is peace, or well-being, the fullness of a life as it should be, enjoying abundance and right relationships. That peace is in a prominent position in each passage, as the final word, in Numbers 6:26, and the first word here in verse 9. In this section, the psalmist celebrates that God does approve of his people and pay attention to them, and it is now a joyful occasion. The section opens with a rhetorical question. Who will show us good? As in, whom can we trust to provide for us? Who will bless us with rain and good harvests, with peace and security? The question is rhetorical, which means the speaker does not expect an answer, but there is an answer. Using questions like this is a literary device to highlight that everyone is looking for somebody to give them what is good. Many people do not find what they are looking for, but Israel has found their answer to the question in the Lord, and that is why they are celebrating. The celebration in the last section is connected closely with the invitation in the middle of the psalm, because David recognizes that the blessing has an additional purpose. Lift up the light of your face as a banner over us, Lord. The meaning is, show us your approval and blessing, not just for us, but as a sign that is visible to all the world, marking the way to the place where anyone can come to find security and peace. A banner was an official symbol, like a flag or sign. It had two purposes. It would show who a military unit, leader, or nation was, and it would also show where the unit, leader, or nation could be found. The psalm celebrates Israel's blessing and desires that the blessing be visible to everyone, showing that the Lord's people are so blessed that other nations want to be blessed like them, and showing how other nations can experience the same blessing. Verse 8 describes the events that probably caused David to write the psalm. You have put joy in my heart since the time their grain and their new wine multiplied. That is, when I was in distress, I prayed, and you answered. You answered by sending rain, which led to an abundant harvest. Since that abundant harvest, I am very joyful as I have experienced your blessings. God giving rain doesn't only bless the nation, but also David himself. If a nation trusts the Lord, it means they're not depending on other gods or kings to save them from enemies, droughts, and famines. Verse 9 gives a glimpse of what a person trusting in the Lord looks like. In peace, I can both lie down and fall asleep, because you alone, Lord, make me dwell securely. As we noted, the phrase in peace is placed first in the Hebrew sentence instead of the normal word order. This highlights that peace or well-being now summarizes how the psalmist lives. Here is a picture of peace that people from all places and times can relate to. He is able to lie down and rest, and because he is no longer worried about anything, he's able to fall asleep quickly. He is not worried about enemies attacking, or not enough rain, or failing harvests. The Lord alone makes him dwell securely. The Lord alone makes him live in peace. This person speaking in verse 9 is the king, who is speaking as anointed representative of the people, David. His personal peace represents national peace. Both the king and the nation enjoy the happiness and safety that come from being in covenant with the Lord. Anyone who will be loyal to the Lord can relax in perfect security, just like David and like Israel. Psalm 4 weaves together themes of relief and restoring peace and joy. It describes how these themes affect individuals, Israel, and the nations of the world. The king, as representative of the people, was distressed during a difficult time, but God gave him relief by answering his prayer and sending the help he asked for. he ends up able to sleep in perfect peace. The nation of Israel was distressed, likely because of a drought, but God relieved them and sent rain, so now they celebrate their abundant grain and new wine. All of humanity faces distress, but they are invited to consider the pattern of how God blesses Israel and how Israel worships God in return. And all people are invited to come experience the same pattern for themselves. God will bring relief to them too, if they will stop worshiping false gods and come worship the Lord in the way He requires. If they will worship the Lord alone, they too can experience God's blessing, because He makes things right for His people, relieving them in all their hard times when they ask for help. The Lord does answer His people when they pray. That is a reason to celebrate. Now we'll conclude with a dramatic reading of the psalm that draws all of this together.
For the director, with stringed instruments, a psalm by David. When I called out, the God who makes things right for me answered me. In the distress you granted me relief. He was merciful to me and heard my prayer. Mortal humans, how long will you be heavy-hearted? Why would you love what is worthless, seek what is false? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart one who is loyal to Him. The Lord hears when I call out to Him. Tremble and do not sin. Think to yourselves on your beds and be silent. Selah. Sacrifice right sacrifices and trust in the Lord. Many are saying, who shows us good? Lift up the light of your face as a banner over us, Lord. You have put joy in my heart since the time their grain and their new wine multiplied. In peace, I can both lie down and fall asleep, because you alone, Lord, make me dwell securely.